This is a well-known stereotype about Poland, a grey post-communist country that has nothing but cheap, unskilled labor. But this stereotype no longer reflects reality. Today's Poland looks very different. Over the past 30 years, Poland has undergone incredible transformations. It grew faster than any other economy in Europe and faster than the Asian tigers, such as Singapore, South Korea, or Taiwan. Today, Poland is becoming a major technological hub. The Polish economy could surpass the economy of the United Kingdom by 2030. And after many years of a massive brain drain, highly skilled Poles are now returning home. But it's not just about the economy. Poland is creating one of the most powerful armies in Europe and is quickly becoming one of the most influential countries on the continent. As these changes continue to gain momentum, it becomes impossible to ignore the growing significance of Poland. In fact, as a satellite country, Poland's economy served the interests of the Soviet Union and was forced to produce, buy, and sell everything that Moscow wanted, regardless of economic feasibility. As a result, the centralized planned economy proved to be unsustainable and inefficient, suffering from constant shortages of basic goods and a lack of resources. When the communist regimes of Eastern Europe finally collapsed in 1989 and Poland became free and independent, it emerged from behind the Iron Curtain as one of the poorest countries in Europe, with extremely underdeveloped infrastructure and public services, as well as almost no capitalist experience and participation in the global economy. The average salary was 10 times lower than in Germany, and the country struggled with hyperinflation. In other words, it was not a country worth betting on for great success indeed. But let's fast forward 30 years and see what happened. So how did Poland achieve this? In fact, as a satellite country, Poland's economy served the interests of the Soviet Union and was forced to produce, buy, and sell everything that Moscow wanted, regardless of economic feasibility. As a result, the centralized planned economy proved to be unsustainable and inefficient, suffering from constant shortages of basic goods and a lack of resources. When the communist regimes of Eastern Europe finally collapsed in 1989 and Poland became free and independent, it emerged from behind the Iron Curtain as one of the poorest countries in Europe, with extremely underdeveloped infrastructure and public services, as well as almost no capitalist experience and participation in the global economy. The average salary was 10 times lower than in Germany, and the country struggled with hyperinflation. In other words, it was not a country worth betting on for great success. But let's fast forward 30 years and see what happened. So how did Poland achieve this? Since 1992, Poland has grown continuously for almost 3 decades, achieving the longest period of growth in modern European history. Few countries are capable of this, and the reason is that usually, once they find a successful strategy, they continue to stick to it even when it stops working. But Poland, on the contrary, managed to find different growth strategies for each of the 3 decades, which allowed it to grow so quickly and for so long. Since the early 90s, the main task, as in other post-communist countries, was the transition from a centralized state economy to a capitalist model. In most countries, these transitional reforms were problematic to some extent. Either they took too much time or were consumed by corruption, and a significant portion of state resources ended up in the hands of a few oligarchs who became wealthy thanks to their political connections. Poland, on the other hand, managed this transition perhaps better than the rest. Adapted to capitalism but privatized most state-owned companies slowly and a few years later than most of its neighbors after the chaos subsided and it became a bit harder to steal everything. Thanks to this, it became practically the only post-communist country whose economy was not under the control of oligarchs and did not collapse in the 90s. However, despite a successful start in the early 2000s, this was no longer enough for further growth. The next stage was globalization. In 2004, Poland joined the European Union and the open European market with its free movement of goods and services. In the absence of any barriers between Poland and the rest of Europe, it became logical for Western European companies to move their production to Poland, where they had access to a lot of very cheap labor. And although these companies took most of the profits, Poland received enough to continue growing at a fairly rapid pace. Joining the EU has brought another significant advantage, as one of the key principles of the Union is the redistribution of money from wealthier member states to less developed ones, in order to balance economic inequality within the Union. After joining the EU, Eastern European countries began receiving large sums of money, and Poland managed to use them for building and improving everything from roads to universities. And once again, it has done this much more effectively than many other Eastern European countries. However, this may only be sufficient for a certain period, and many countries following a similar trajectory ultimately fall into the so-called middle-income trap. If your economy is based on providing foreign companies with cheap labor, You can only grow to a certain level. And if you can't offer anything else besides this, and you don't have your own major companies, you will get stuck. But it seems that Poland is avoiding this trap for now. Approximately 15 years ago, foreign companies came to hire unskilled and low-paid workers to perform routine tasks. But today they come because Poland is one of the largest centers of engineering talent in Europe. Instead of warehouses and simple factories, companies like Google are opening research and development centers here. However, despite this, Poland is still a relatively poor country, at least compared to most countries in Western Europe. But the growth has been impressive and inclusive. Average wages in the country have significantly increased, while inequality has remained low. This is not the kind of growth that exists only on paper or benefits only a select few. Growth that truly impacts the entire society. And there is another area beyond economic growth where Poland has recently attracted a lot of attention. It is its unprecedented military buildup. Historically, Poland has had strong reasons for a certain level of paranoia. Sandwiched between Germany and Russia, Poland has been invaded multiple times. Division and colonization, losing its independence. And although today it is a member of NATO, the historical memory of these events is still alive. While most European countries were reducing their defense spending, Poland maintained one of the highest levels of military funding in NATO. After 2022, Poland significantly increased its defense spending. It announced that in the coming years it will raise military expenditures to 5% of GDP, which is higher than any other NATO member. It will double the size of its armed forces to 300,000 personnel, and will purchase thousands of tanks, fighter jets, and other military equipment. By the end of the decade, Poland plans to create the most powerful land forces in Europe, which will become one of the most ambitious military programs in modern European history. Nevertheless, despite all the achievements, the question remains whether these plans will be realized. Despite the successes, there are significant risks that could undermine the Polish miracle. And not everyone is so optimistic about the future of Poland. For a long time, the demographic situation was considered the #1 threat, as about 500,000 people have left the country over the past 30 years. But now it seems that Poland has managed to reverse this trend. In recent years, there has been a reverse brain drain, with Poles and people of Polish descent living abroad starting to return to the country. And since the country has accepted more than 1.5 million Ukrainians, the demographic situation looks much better. Thus, there are two main real risks. First, although the growth is impressive, Poland has not yet completely avoided the middle-income trap. It still heavily relies on foreign investments, and although technology centers are opening in Warsaw, they are being established by foreign companies, not Polish ones. And although this provides jobs and growth, there is a limit to how much can be achieved, as a large portion of the profits ultimately leaves the country. To reach the top league, national giants in various sectors are needed, with high added value which Poland currently lacks or has in insufficient quantities. But a much more serious challenge has a completely different nature and concerns an aspect of Polish history that we have not yet mentioned. The fact is that Poland is so deeply divided that one can almost speak of two different Polands, one liberal and progressive and the other deeply conservative and religious. Much like in the USA, it is becoming increasingly difficult for these two Polands to coexist. Polls show that both sides are extremely suspicious of each other, intolerant of opposing views, and increasingly unwilling to compromise. For several years, the current conservative government has been criticized by the liberal opposition for allegedly violating rules to retain power. Additionally, the conflict with the European Union is escalating, with the EU threatening to cut off funding to Poland as punishment for not adhering to the principles of the rule of law. And the fact is, regardless of which side, whatever you choose, the end result will be bad both for each side individually and for Poland as a whole. The country needs both parts of the population to coexist and work together, and it needs the European Union to achieve real success. If this cannot be achieved, the Polish miracle will end before it truly begins.